Elena Voss stood at the edge of the training field long after everyone else had gone inside. The sun was setting behind the pine trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep red. She wrapped her arms around herself, though the evening was not cold. It was a habit she had picked up 3 winters ago, a way of holding herself together when the world felt too big and too empty. 3 winters ago, she had lost everything: her pack, her family, her home. Rogue wolves had come in the night and torn her old life apart. She still remembered running through the snow, her bare feet burning with cold, her lungs screaming for air. She remembered falling. She remembered thinking she would die there, alone, in the white silence of the forest. Then she remembered him. Damien Blackthorn, the Alpha King of the United Territories, had found her half buried in snow, her body shaking, her eyes barely open. He had wrapped her in his own coat and carried her for miles without stopping, without complaint. She had been a stranger to him then, a girl with no pack and no name he recognized. But he had not left her. That night changed everything for Elena, though she never told anyone how much. Now, 3 years later, she was still living in the Blackthorn territory, still under the protection of the king who had saved her life. She had become part of the pack in every way that mattered. She trained with the warriors, she helped in the healing house, she had friends, a home, a life she had rebuilt piece by piece. But there was one thing she had never allowed herself to have: a mate. Or rather, she had never allowed herself to admit that she already knew who her mate was. From the very first night, when Damien's eyes had met hers in the snow, something inside her had shifted. It was not just gratitude. It was not just relief at being saved. It was a pull, deep and quiet, the kind that wolves spoke of in old stories, the kind that was supposed to be rare and undeniable. She had told herself it was nothing. She had told herself that a broken girl with no pack had no right to look at a king and think of him as anything more than her savior. So she buried the feeling. She buried it so deep that most days she almost believed it was gone. Almost. Tonight, everything would change. The pack elders had announced a choosing, a rare and old tradition where every unmated wolf in the territory would stand before the king and either name their mate or be named by one. It was meant to strengthen the bonds within the united packs, to make sure no wolf walked alone when a true bond was waiting to be recognized. Elena had wanted to refuse. She had told her friend Mara that she would find an excuse not to attend. But Mara, ever stubborn, had pulled her along anyway, insisting that skipping the choosing would only draw more attention, not less. So here she was, standing outside the great hall, listening to the low hum of voices inside, trying to find the courage to walk through the doors. "You look like you are about to face an execution, not a ceremony," Mara said, appearing beside her with a teasing smile. "It is just words, Elena. Say your piece, and it will be over before you know it." "It is never just words," Elena murmured. "Not for me." Mara's smile softened. She had been the first wolf in the pack to truly welcome Elena, back when Elena flinched at every sudden sound, and slept with her back against the wall. Mara did not know the full truth of what Elena felt for the king, but she suspected enough to give her hand a gentle squeeze. "Whatever happens in there," Mara said, "you are not alone. You have not been alone for 3 years. Do not forget that tonight." Elena nodded, though her heart was pounding so hard, she was sure everyone inside could hear it. Together, they walked through the doors of the great hall. The hall was full. Warriors, healers, elders, and every unmated wolf of fighting age filled the wooden benches and lined the walls. Torches burned along the stone columns, filling the space with warm, flickering light. At the far end, on a raised platform, sat the throne of the Alpha King. Damien Blackthorn sat there now, dressed simply in dark clothing that somehow made him look more powerful, not less. He was not a king who needed golden crowns or heavy robes to command respect. His presence alone did that. His dark hair was swept back, his sharp eyes moving calmly over the crowd, missing nothing. Elena had seen him like this many times before, in council meetings, in the training yard, across the dining hall. But tonight, knowing what the ceremony demanded, she found it hard to look at him directly. She kept her eyes low as she found a place near the back of the hall. One by one, The unmated wolves were called forward. The eldest healer, a woman named Ophelia, stood beside the throne and called each name in turn. Some wolves stepped forward, and, the moment their eyes met another's across the room, their whole bodies seemed to light up. The pull of a true mate bond was impossible to hide. Cheers and laughter rose from the crowd each time a pair was confirmed, and Elena watched with a strange ache in her chest, happy for them, yet lonelier with every match that was made. Others stood alone when called, admitting they had not yet found their bond. Ophelia would nod gently and let them step back, for the choosing was not meant to force a match, it was only meant to reveal what already existed. Then Ophelia called Elena's name. For a moment, Elena could not move. Mara gave her a small push, and somehow her legs carried her forward, through the crowd, until she stood in the open space before the throne. She felt the weight of every eye in the hall pressing on her skin. She kept her gaze fixed on the stone floor, refusing to look up at the throne, refusing to look at him. "Elena Voss," Ophelia said, her voice kind but carrying easily through the silent hall. "Do you know your mate?" This was the moment. This was the question she had dreaded for weeks, ever since the choosing was announced. She could lie. She could say the words that would end this quickly, that would let her retreat back into the safety of silence she had built for herself over 3 long years. She lifted her chin. She made herself look, not at the throne, but at Ophelia, at the crowd, anywhere but at the one person whose gaze she could not bear to meet. "I have no mate," Elena said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected, though it cost her everything to keep it that way. "I never have. I do not expect to." It was not entirely a lie. No official bond had ever been declared. No one had ever spoken the words aloud. But it was not the truth either, and she felt the weight of that lie settle heavy in her chest the moment it left her lips. The hall was silent for a beat too long. Then a sound rolled through the room, low and rough, coming not from the crowd but from the throne itself. It was a growl, not the kind of growl that came before a fight. This was something else entirely, something raw and urgent, a sound that seemed to come from deep inside a man who had spent 3 years holding something back. Every head in the hall turned toward the king. Damien was standing now, though Elena had not seen him rise. His hands were pressed flat against the arms of his throne, and his expression, always so calm and controlled, had cracked wide open. His eyes, when they found hers, were not entirely his own. There was something older and wilder looking out through them, something that had clearly decided it would stay silent no longer. "You have me." The words came out rough, edged with a depth that was not quite human. A murmur of shock ran through the crowd. No one, not even the eldest wolves who had served 3 kings before him, had ever heard Damien Blackthorne lose control of his voice in public. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Damien. He came down the steps of the platform slowly, and the crowd parted before him without needing to be told. He did not stop until he stood directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. 3 years, he said, and his voice was steadier now, though his eyes still burned with something fierce and unguarded. 3 years I said nothing. I told myself you needed a home before you needed a mate. I told myself I would not use what I am to you against you, not when you had already lost so much. I thought I was protecting you by staying silent. Elena's eyes stung, though she refused to let the tears fall in front of the entire hall. You never said anything. I thought I had imagined it. I thought it was only me. You did not imagine it. His hand rose slowly, not quite touching her face, waiting for permission he had never allowed himself to ask for before. Ask anyone who has stood near me these past 3 years. Ask them how many times my eyes found you across a room I was supposed to be leading. Ask them how many times I forgot what I was saying because you had walked past the window. A soft ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, gentle and warm, breaking some of the tension that had filled the hall only moments before. You stood in my hall tonight, Damien continued, and told my entire pack that you belong to no one. I could not let that stand, not when it is not true, not when it has never been true. Elena finally let her hand rise to meet his, pressing his palm against her cheek. The warmth of his touch, the steadiness of it, undid something in her that she had held tightly closed for 3 years. I was afraid, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, though the silent hall carried it easily to every corner. I was afraid that if I said it out loud, it would not be real, that I would lose you, the way I lost everyone else. You will not lose me, Damien said. Not to silence, not to distance, not to anything. I have spent 3 years proving that to you without words. Let me prove it now with them, in front of everyone who matters, so there is never any doubt again. He looked at her, waiting, giving her the choice that he had denied himself for so long. Elena took a breath. She thought of the girl who had collapsed in the snow, certain her story was over. She thought of the 3 years since, of every quiet moment when she had told herself that wanting him was foolish, that she did not deserve to want anything at all. She thought of how tired she was of carrying that lie alone. Then I suppose I was wrong, she said, her voice growing stronger with every word. I have a mate. I have had one since the night he found me in the snow and refused to let go. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Say it once more, Damien said softly, his forehead nearly resting against hers, before all of them, so no one in this hall ever mistakes it again. Elena turned slightly, facing the crowd, though she kept her hand in his. I am not mateless, she said clearly, her voice carrying to every wall of the great hall. I belong to the Alpha King. I always have. The hall erupted, not in shock, but in the fierce, joyful noise of a pack that had clearly known the truth long before either of them had been brave enough to say it aloud. Warriors pounded their fists against the wooden tables. Elders smiled and wiped their eyes. Mara, near the back of the hall, laughed and cried at the same time, shouting something Elena could not quite hear over the celebration. Damien pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers, and for the first time in 3 years, Elena let herself believe that she was allowed to be happy. She was allowed to be loved. She was allowed to belong somewhere, to someone, without fear of losing it all again. Outside, the last light of sunset faded into a deep, quiet blue, and the stars began to appear one by one over the Blackthorn territory. Inside the great hall, surrounded by the pack that had become her family, Elena Voss finally let go of the silence she had carried for so long and stepped into the life she had been too afraid to claim. It was, she thought, the truest kind of homecoming. Not the snow, not the rescue, not even the crown. It was this. It was him. It was the simple, steady truth that she was never mateless at all, and never would be again.